There's a certain kind of quiet that can only be found in the dead of night. It's not the peaceful kind, not the silence that wraps around you in comfort. No, this kind of quiet sinks into your skin, crawls its way through your veins, and lingers in the corners of the room, heavy and oppressive. That's the quiet I found myself sitting in when it all started. It had been 3 days since Hannah left for her business trip. She was always so organized, so on top of everything. I watched her pack with military precision, folding her clothes just so, her suitcase looking like a neatly wrapped present. She kissed me on the cheek before she left, her smile warm, but there was something else in her eyes. A flicker of something I couldn't place. Nerves, maybe? Excitement? I didn't ask. "I'll call you when I land," she had said, and with that, she was gone. The house felt emptier without her. I tried to tell myself it was normal. Everyone feels a little weird when their partner leaves for a few days. But the truth was, I never liked being alone in this house. It was too old, too big. The kind of house where every creak and groan feels like something watching you. I made it through the first couple of nights by drowning out the quiet with the TV, leaving it on until I fell asleep. But on the third night, I woke up to something strange. It was 3 a.m. I remember that distinctly because the clock on the bedside table was glowing red, casting a dim, unsettling light across the room. At first, I didn't know why I was awake. There was no sound, no reason for my brain to have shaken itself from the fog of sleep. But then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic knock. It wasn't the kind of knock that would startle you. It was the kind that slowly burrowed its way into your mind, a persistent sound that refused to be ignored. I sat up, blinking away the sleep, trying to figure out if I had imagined it. The house was still, unnaturally so, but there it was again. I felt my heart pick up speed. Someone was at the front door. I checked the clock again. 3 a.m. Who the hell knocks on your door at 3 in the morning? I threw on a shirt and shuffled toward the door, trying to convince myself it was probably just a neighbor, maybe someone who needed help. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was off. I don't know how I knew, but there was this instinctual part of me that screamed not to open the door. Still, I had to check. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the moon spilling in through the windows. I reached the door and, with more hesitation than I cared to admit, I peered through the peephole. There, standing on the front porch, was Hannah. For a split second, my brain couldn't process it. I stared at her, blinking in confusion. Hannah was supposed to be on a plane, hundreds of miles away. She couldn't be here. And yet, there she was, standing on the doorstep, her hair tousled, her clothes the same as when she had left. But then I noticed something else. Her eyes. They were wrong. Black, bottomless, and cold, like two empty pits in her face. Her smile was too wide, too fixed, and it sent a chill crawling up my spine. "Michael," she said, her voice muffled through the door. "Let me in." My throat tightened. I wanted to respond, to say something, anything, but I was frozen. Every instinct I had was telling me this wasn't my wife. It looked like her, sure, but there was something off, something wrong. "Michael, please." Her voice was soft, pleading, but the wrongness in it sent a wave of nausea rolling through me. "I forgot something. Let me in." I backed away from the door, shaking my head as if she could see me. There was no way I was opening that door. Not now, not ever. After a few agonizing minutes, the knocking stopped. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my body tense and trembling, listening for any sound, any indication that she, or it, was still out there. But the only thing I could hear was the thundering of my own heartbeat. Eventually, I convinced myself to go back to bed. I told myself it was a dream, a figment of my imagination. It had to be. There was no other explanation. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. The next morning, I called Hannah. She answered after a couple of rings, her voice chipper, normal. "Hey, babe, how's it going?" she asked, oblivious to the terror that had gripped me the night before. I hesitated, trying to find the words. Are you okay?" "Yeah, of course. Why?" I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone that their doppelganger showed up at your door in the middle of the night with eyes as black as tar? "I don't know, I missed you, I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. Oh, I miss you too. I'll be home in a couple of days, okay? Just hang in there. We hung up, and for the rest of the day, I tried to shake off the unease that clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't focus on anything. Work was a blur, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, those black eyes, staring at me through the peephole. That night, I stayed up late, deliberately keeping myself awake. I didn't want to fall asleep, didn't want to wake up at 3 a.m. again. But as it often does, exhaustion won out. I woke up to the sound of knocking. My heart leaped into my throat. I checked the clock. 3 a.m. on the dot. For a long time, I didn't move. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, hoping that if I ignored it, the knocking would stop. But it didn't. Reluctantly, I got up and made my way to the front door. I don't know why I did it, why I felt compelled to look again. Maybe I was hoping that I had just imagined it the night before. But as I approached the door, my breath hitched in my throat. She was there again, standing on the porch, looking exactly as she had the night before. Only this time, her smile was wider, her eyes darker. "Michael," she said, her voice honey-sweet, but with an undercurrent of something sinister. "Let me in." I backed away, my legs shaking. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. My wife was on a business trip. This was something else, something pretending to be her. For the next 3 nights, the same thing happened. Every night at 3 a.m., the knocking would start, and every night I would find her standing there, her smile growing wider, her eyes blacker. She was relentless, always asking to be let in, always pleading in that sickeningly sweet voice. By the 5th night, I had stopped sleeping altogether. I couldn't take it anymore. The knocking, the voice, it was driving me mad. I couldn't eat, couldn't think. All I could do was sit in the living room, staring at the door, waiting for the inevitable. That night, when the clock struck 3 a.m., the knocking came again, but this time it was louder, more insistent. The force of the knock shook the door, rattling it in its frame. I jumped, my pulse spiking with fear. I was sure the door would break down at any moment. "Michael?" Her voice came again, softer this time, like a whisper slithering through the cracks. "Please let me in." I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. All I could do was stare at the door, frozen in place, my mind screaming for it to stop. "I'm cold, Michael," she continued, her tone now dripping with sadness, her voice cracking ever so slightly.
Don't you love me anymore?
The words sent a shiver through me, twisting my gut into knots. It was manipulating me, preying on every tender emotion I had for Hanna. But this thing was not Hanna. I knew that now. Whatever it was, it wore her face like a mask, mimicking her voice with eerie accuracy. But it wasn't her. I couldn't take it any longer. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone, desperate to hear Hannah's real voice. My hands shook as I dialed her number, and after what felt like an eternity, she answered. "Hey babe, everything okay?" Her voice was warm, familiar, but it did nothing to soothe the terror clenching at my heart. "Hanna," I whispered, glancing at the door. The knocking had stopped, but I knew it, was still out there, waiting. "Are you sure you're okay? Are you safe?" "Michael, I'm fine," she replied, her tone light and carefree. "I'm at the hotel. I told you. I'll be back in a couple of days." A cold realization began to form in the pit of my stomach. I felt dizzy, like the floor was tilting beneath my feet. "You're sure?" I asked again, my voice barely audible. She laughed softly, like she found my worry endearing. "Yes, I'm sure. Why do you keep asking me that? Is something going on?" I was about to explain, to tell her everything. The knocks, the thing pretending to be her, the eyes. But something stopped me. For a moment, her voice sounded wrong. It was just a flicker, a slight distortion in the way she said the word, sure. But it was enough to make me pause. "What's going on?" she asked again, her tone shifting, becoming more serious, more concerned. "Michael?" I trailed off, unsure of what to say. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. Could it be possible that this thing outside, this creature, was somehow getting to her too? Michael, she said again, more insistently, talk to me. I couldn't. Not now. Something felt off, horribly off, and I needed time to think. It's nothing, I lied, my voice trembling. Just tired, I guess. Well, get some rest, okay? I'll be home soon. Her voice softened again, back to that comforting, familiar tone. But I couldn't shake the unease crawling through me. After we hung up, I sat in silence. The phone still clutched in my hand. The house felt colder, darker, and even though the knocking had stopped, the tension in the air was palpable. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside made my skin prickle with fear. I kept expecting the knocking to start again, but it never did. The silence was worse somehow, thick, suffocating, like the calm before the storm. The next day, I received a call from Hanna. I hesitated before answering, my heart hammering in my chest. What if it wasn't her? What if the thing outside had somehow gotten to her phone? Hey, Michael, she said, her voice bright and chipper, the way it always was in the morning. I've got a surprise for you. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to respond. A surprise? Yeah, I'm coming home early. I managed to wrap up the trip sooner than expected. I'll be home tonight. Panic surged through me. Tonight? She couldn't come home tonight. I wasn't ready. Whatever was happening here, whatever was outside, it was escalating, and I had no idea how to stop it. If she came back now, she would be in danger. I needed more time to figure this out, to protect her. Hanna, wait. Maybe you should stay there a little longer, I stammered, trying to keep the rising fear out of my voice. What? Why? Her tone was light, but I could sense the confusion. Michael, what's going on? Nothing, I just don't want you to rush back, that's all. It's safer there. Safer, she repeated, a slight edge to her voice now. Michael, what are you talking about? I could hear the impatience growing, but I didn't know how to explain it to her. How do you tell someone that there's a thing pretending to be them, knocking on your door every night at 3 a.m.? I don't know, I muttered, my voice weak. I don't feel right. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she had hung up. But then she spoke again, her voice calm but firm. Michael, I'm coming home tonight. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out together. I'll see you soon. She hung up before I could protest. As the day wore on, the dread in my chest grew heavier with each passing hour. I knew she would be here soon, but I didn't know if I was ready for what would happen next. By the time the clock hit midnight, the house felt suffocating, the shadows longer, darker. I sat in the living room waiting, my nerves on edge. Every sound made me jump. Every creak of the floorboards sent my heart racing. And then, just before 3 a.m., I heard it. The sound of Hanna's car pulling into the driveway. My breath hitched in my throat. She was here, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to face what was about to happen. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I stood frozen, staring at the door. My mind screamed at me to run, to hide, but my body refused to move. Michael, it's me, came Hanna's voice from the other side. Let me in. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. What if it wasn't her? What if this was just another trick? But then I heard it again. Her voice, warm and familiar, but somehow different this time. Michael, I'm home. I steeled myself, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I turned the doorknob and opened the door. There she stood, smiling at me in the moonlight. Her face was exactly as I remembered, her eyes bright and full of life. Hanna, I breathed, relief flooding through me. You're home. She stepped inside, her smile widening. But as she walked past me, I noticed something. Something subtle but unmistakable. Her eyes, they were too dark, too empty. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat as she looked back at me, her smile growing wider, too wide, stretching unnaturally across her face. Michael, she whispered, her voice sweet and familiar.
You should have let me in sooner.
I took a step back, my body trembling with terror as the realization hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't my wife. It never had been. The thing in my house, standing there smiling at me with those black, soulless eyes, had been waiting for this moment all along, waiting for me to finally let it in. And now, it was too late. The door behind me clicked shut with a soft finality, and the last thing I heard was the sound of her laughter, low, chilling, and inhuman, echoing through the empty halls.